She came to talk policy. But when Sunny Hostin questioned her tone, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett delivered a response so sharp, so real, it froze the view in its tracks and ignited a national conversation. Backstage, the energy was unusually still. No leftover arguments from earlier segments, no echo of laughter down the hallway, just the low hum of hairdryers, heels on tile, and a phone buzzing on vibrate somewhere on the counter. Jasmine sat in a cream leather chair, her blazer draped over the back, sipping water and skimming notes she didn't really need. Her aide, Charmaine, kept checking the time, thumb hovering over her screen, waiting on the final producer call. 15 minutes, a PA called out. Jasmine nodded, folding her talking points. She didn't need to rehearse the failures of the prison industrial complex, she'd lived them. Through her district, through case files, through sleepless nights reading names of people crushed by a system built to forget them, she was ready. But something tugged at the edge of her thoughts. You good? Charmaine asked. Jasmine adjusted an earring and exhaled. Yeah, just know how this show goes. Either they love you, or they try to make you a headline. Charmaine didn't answer. She didn't have to. They'd both seen the clips, the subtle digs dressed up as questions, the way sharp, unapologetic black women got labeled difficult the minute they spoke with certainty. A knock on the door. We're bringing you to the stage. Jasmine stood, slipping the notes into her jacket pocket. Not for reference, for resolve. She wasn't here to survive sound bites. She came to speak truth. The walk to the stage felt longer than it was. Studio lights poured over the set. Jasmine scanned the table, Sunny to the left, Whoopi at center, Alyssa Farah Griffin to the right. No Joy Behar today. Noted. She'd be seated directly across from Sunny. You ready? Whoopi asked. Warm, as I'll ever be. Jasmine smiled. The applause sign lit. Cameras rolled. Mics went hot. Action. Whoopi welcomed her with kindness, thanking her for joining to talk criminal justice reform and what it meant to be a voice in today's Congress. Jasmine smiled, gracious, waiting for her cue. Then Sunny leaned in, eyes steady, voice polite. Congresswoman Crockett, you've made quite a name for yourself lately. Not just for what you fight for, but how you fight. Some say your tone in committee hearings comes off combative. Do you worry that might turn off people who'd otherwise be on your side? Jasmine tilted her head. Not shocked, she'd heard this before. Just not this early, not with cameras live. She drew a breath. I think when people watch women speak with certainty, especially black women, it's easy to confuse confidence with confrontation. But my job isn't to be liked. It's to advocate. And I can't do that whispering. The audience clapped. But Sunny wasn't finished. Of course, she continued, but don't you think there's a line between advocacy and antagonism? Just like that, the tone was set. Jasmine didn't flinch. She'd sat in colder rooms. If Sunny was going to press, she'd hold her ground. The audience stayed polite, applause in intervals. Jasmine spoke with clarity and focus, about rehabilitation, about nonviolent offenders serving decades, about East Texas prisons without working AC. Whoopi nodded. So it's not just about policy, she said, it's about access. About who gets second chances. Exactly, Jasmine replied. Some people make a mistake and get a redemption arc. Others make a mistake and get erased. The applause grew louder. Sunny adjusted her pen. Congresswoman, I want to challenge you on that. You've spoken about systemic injustice, and I agree with much of it. But in those tense hearings, like the one with Marjorie Taylor Greene, some say you lost credibility by responding emotionally instead of staying above it. Isn't composure part of the job? Jasmine's voice cooled a few degrees. Sunny, let me ask you something. If someone disrespects you publicly, on the record, while you're doing your job, are you expected to smile and stay silent to protect how they perceive you? Sunny opened her mouth, then paused. Because that's what you're asking me to do, Jasmine continued. Prioritize being composed over being honest. Over standing up for myself. And respectfully, I don't believe women, especially black women, owe anyone that. The room went still. No claps this time. Just silence thick enough to hold in. Your hands, Whoopi tried to pivot. Let's get back to policy, she said, but Sunny pressed. It's not just about expression though, right? It's about effectiveness. If your presence in a hearing becomes the headline, does that help the cause, or distract from it? Jasmine sat back a touch, not retreating, recalibrating. Are we really pretending my tone is the issue? Because when men raise their voices in hearings, they're called passionate. When I do it, it's aggressive. You think I don't see that double standard? You think I haven't lived it? She gestured lightly, not pointing, emphasizing. And let me tell you, I'm effective because of how I speak. People listen. People learn. People feel seen. You know how many folks wrote to me after that hearing? Not because I yelled, but because I didn't fold. This time, the applause returned. And beneath it, murmurs of agreement. Sunny's face stayed composed, but her eyes narrowed slightly. It wasn't a confrontation yet. But it was coming. Let me play devil's advocate, Sunny said, her voice soft but unyielding. Some say you make these moments about yourself. That the camera finds you because you want it to. How do you respond to that? Backstage, Charmaine watched the monitor, jaw tight. The questions weren't about policy anymore. They were about Jasmine's personality. Her worthiness. Jasmine's smile didn't waver. Not sarcastic. Not forced. Just steady. I'm in Congress, she said. A black woman from South Dallas with natural hair and no interest in shrinking myself to fit a mold built without me in mind. If I wanted the easy road, I'd have picked a different lane. But I didn't. I chose this one. So, yeah, the camera finds me. But not because I'm performing. Because I'm telling the truth in rooms that are used to avoiding it. The room erupted in applause. Louder this time. A ripple you could feel, and for the first time, Sunny didn't speak. She just looked at Jasmine, not angry. Just realizing this wasn't a guest who came for sound bites and the real moment? It hadn't even happened yet. The question wasn't just about politics anymore. Do you think being confrontational moves policy forward? She asked. Some voters worry your tone, on national television and even here, distracts from the substance. Jasmine didn't flinch, though her gaze sharpened. I think people confuse assertiveness with confrontation, she said evenly. Especially when it comes from women like me. Sunny pressed on. But do you worry about becoming a symbol instead of a legislator? That people recognize you, but is it helping your constituents, or your brand? There it was. The quiet subtext turned loud. Jasmine raised her brows, not in shock, but in disbelief. Are you asking me if I care more about serving my community or building a brand? She asked. Because I ran for office to serve, not to sell. And it's telling. How rarely that question gets asked when men post their viral speeches or tweet their outrage. A few claps. A few people unsure if they should. Sunny gave a tight smile. It's a fair question. Public perception matters. Jasmine leaned forward, not aggressive, just present. And public perception has always been weaponized against women like me. I don't get the benefit of neutrality. I'm not called spirited. I'm labeled. And if I spent my days worrying about how I come off to people who never intended to understand me, I wouldn't get a thing done. This time the applause came louder, with certainty. Alyssa jumped in, trying to shift the current. Look, we should acknowledge one thing. Congresswoman Crockett's been incredibly vocal on issues like bail reform and wrongful incarceration. Whether you agree or not, she's showing up for a conversation a lot of folks ignore. It was a fair save, but Sunny wasn't finished. Criminal justice matters, she said. But tone still matters. Some would say your approach is about generating moments, not building bridges. That did it. Jasmine let the silence settle for a heartbeat longer than usual before answering. You want bridges? She asked, voice low but steady. I've sat in rooms with people who don't think my constituents deserve clean water or a working hospital. I've worked with people who called fixing a school roof too expensive while their kids went to private academies. And I still showed up. I still shook hands. So don't question whether I build bridges just because I won't be silent while they set them on fire. The room froze. Then erupted. Even Whoopi gave a visible nod of approval. Sunny hesitated, then crossed a line. Do you think, she asked carefully, maybe you play the race card too often? The air thinned. A collective breath caught. Jasmine didn't blink. She didn't shift. Her voice stayed calm, almost quiet. I don't play the race card, she said. I live the reality. There's a difference. The audience broke. Applause. Gasps. Alyssa visibly stunned. Charmaine backstage on her feet. Whoopi cut in, fast. Okay, we're going to break, she announced, waving off the tension. Cameras cut, but not before catching Jasmine coolly adjusting her mic and sipping her water like she hadn't just fielded the most loaded question live on daytime TV, but the real moment wasn't what had aired. It was what Jasmine was about to say when they came back. The control room hummed. One AD muttered, we might need to cut this segment. The executive producer didn't flinch. Let it breathe, she said. This is real TV. When they returned from commercial, the studio lights felt brighter. The air denser. Whoopi spoke first, calm but steely. Welcome back. Before the break, things got a little spirited. We're here with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, talking about criminal justice, and a whole lot more. Jasmine smiled, a slight, calm re-entry. Whoopi turned to her. Congresswoman, would you like to respond to where we left off? Jasmine shifted just enough to face Sunny directly. No flinch. No performative grin. Just clarity. When people say race card, she began, what they're really doing is dismissing lived experiences they don't want to deal with. I'm not here to soften the truth just to make it more comfortable for someone else. My job isn't to keep folks at ease. It's to make sure the people who've been ignored, criminalized, and dismissed finally get heard. The studio was silent. No cough, no shuffle, no camera adjustment. The weight of it settled. Sunny shifted, but said nothing. Jasmine went on. I was invited here to talk about policy, not personality. But if we're going to talk tone, let's talk about how tone only becomes an issue when certain people use it. Nobody asks Jim Jordan to tone it down. Nobody tells Ted Cruz to smile more. But when I speak directly, suddenly it's a problem. This time, she turned toward the audience, not the hosts. There's a reason so many black women stopped watching this show years ago. Not because we disagreed, but because we saw how guests who looked like us were treated when they refused to shrink themselves. I came here thinking maybe it would be different. Sunny's jaw set. I don't think that's fair, she said sharply. We've had countless black women on this show. We've had hard conversations. That doesn't mean there's no bias, Jasmine replied, unblinking. You don't always see it from your seat. But trust me, we feel it in ours. The audience started to clap again, hesitated, but Whoopi spoke, steady. We don't want to shut the conversation down. But let's pivot. Jasmine didn't let go. That's another thing, she said, softer now, deliberate. The instinct. To pivot. To call it uncomfortable. To say it's not the right time. But the people living under these systems don't get to pick the time. They live in it every single day. Sunny exhaled. This isn't personal. I didn't say it. Jasmine replied. But you're asking me to defend my tone, my presence, my intention, and I came here to talk about prison reform. So if we're going to be honest, let's be fully honest. Her voice hadn't risen once. But it landed, in homes, break rooms, and group chats across the country. By the time the show cut to its next break, clips were already being posted. Charmaine scrolled through them backstage, watching Jasmine's name multiply by the second. The hashtag let black women speak had started to appear again, not trending yet, but inching closer. On set, Whoopi stepped in, "We're gonna take another break." As the camera pulled back, the audience gave Jasmine a steady, deliberate round of applause. Not a wild cheer, but the kind that says, "We heard you," but when the show returned, it wasn't the hosts or even Jasmine who owned the moment. It was what was already happening online. By the time the next segment began, something in Jasmine had shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was certainty, the kind that settles in when you realize the table you were invited to was never set for you. She didn't raise her voice, didn't retreat into politeness. She stayed steady, centered. Whoopi, trying to ease them back into policy, said, "Let's get into specifics on your prison reform proposal. I know a lot of people watching want to hear how this impacts families." And Jasmine did exactly that, clear, calm, deliberate. She outlined her three-point plan. First, an independent federal commission to review wrongful incarceration cases in real time, not years after lives had already been ruined. Second, mandatory rehabilitation programs inside state-funded prisons, directly partnering with community organizations. And third, a full elimination of private prison contracts, as she put it, institutions profiting off public systems failures. She spoke like someone who had sat in those visiting rooms, read those files, buried those names. She told the story of Devin L., a 19-year-old sentenced to 30 years for a nonviolent drug offense, who died behind bars before his appeal was even heard. This time, the room didn't go quiet out of discomfort, it was out of respect. Even Alyssa nodded, but Sunny wasn't done. "It's a powerful plan," she said, leaning in. "But where's the bipartisan support going to come from? And if it doesn't pass, what do you say to the people who believed in you?" Jasmine let a pause stretch. Not empty silence, a conscious choice. "I'd say this," she began. "Progress isn't always packaged in polished victory speeches. Sometimes it's a slow, unglamorous fight. And every time I speak, I know someone's listening, someone who didn't know they could raise their voice until now." Then she turned to Sunny. Not cold. Just direct, and I think we both know the hardest part isn't passing a bill. It's convincing people justice matters, even when it doesn't affect them. Sunny started to reply, then stopped. Whoopi smiled faintly and said, "Okay, let's let that one sit for a moment." The room stayed still. No comeback. No crosstalk. That was Jasmine's victory, not a shouting match, not a viral clapback, but a line that made people put down their phones and sit up. The camera panned across the audience. Some stood to clap. Others leaned forward, hanging on to what might come next. It wasn't a TV moment. It was something deeper. Backstage, Charmaine's phone was lighting up non-stop. The hashtag was trending now, top 10. But another had joined it, hashtag Team Crockett, tweets from verified accounts, celebrities, activists, even a few unexpected political names. "She's not just talking, she's teaching. This is what grace under fire looks like. I turned this on by accident and now I'm rethinking everything." At the table, Sunny folded her hands. She wasn't smiling anymore, and she didn't push back. There was a long, loaded pause before she finally said, "I hear you." Jasmine didn't gloat. She just nodded once. Whoopi leaned forward. "Congresswoman, before we wrap, anything you want to leave our viewers with?" Jasmine glanced around the table, then locked eyes with the camera. "Don't mistake volume for value," she said. "The truth doesn't need to shout to be powerful. Sometimes the most radical thing a black woman can do is speak clearly, and not apologize for it." The audience erupted. This time, the applause didn't hesitate. 10 solid seconds of it. And somewhere in that noise, something broke wide open. Not just in the studio, outside of it too. Her words didn't stop at the studio doors. Within minutes, they were rippling across timelines, reframing the story before the credits had a chance to roll. The studio lights dimmed for the final commercial, the room settled into a charged, heavy quiet. The applause had faded, but the Tension hung thick. Whoopi stood first, stretching, murmuring to a producer, "We'll talk about this later." Alyssa whispered something to her team and left the table. That left Sunny and Jasmine alone, still mic'd. Sunny glanced down at her. Notes, then over at Jasmine. Nothing. Charmaine, backstage, hovered near the producers, eyes locked on Jasmine's silhouette. She wasn't rattled, but something in her had shifted. Jasmine wasn't just answering questions anymore. She was deciding which ones mattered. The stage manager quietly approached. "Back in 30. Finally, Sunny spoke. "You came in swinging. Today." Jasmine turned to her, steady. "I came in prepared." Sunny gave a half smile. "You think I came after you?" Jasmine didn't blink. "You came after a version of me that's easier to debate. The one that's too loud, too visible, too confident. I've seen her used against women like me my whole life." Sunny looked down, turning her pen in her hand. "I was trying to ask tough questions. And I answered them." Jasmine replied. "The part that made people uncomfortable wasn't what I said. It was that I didn't flinch while saying it." Before Sunny could respond, Whoopi returned, easing into her seat. "Well," she said, glancing between them, "that was something." Alyssa reappeared, smiling tight. "The internet's about to have a lot to say." Jasmine glanced toward the audience. Some people were standing, some already scrolling through their phones. She could feel it. The story had left the room backstage. Charmaine's phone buzzed relentlessly. Mentions stacked up. Video clips were already circulating, one of Jasmine saying, "I don't play the race card. I live the reality," had been reposted by a filmmaker with over 2 million followers. Another was picked up by an education nonprofit calling her a voice of reason in a room full of soft bias. The producers huddled. "Should we cut the segment from the upload?" The senior producer shook her head. "Leave it. We're not hiding this." Back on set, the cameras counted down again. Jasmine adjusted her mic. "Y'all good?" she asked the crew. The sound tech grinned, giving her a thumbs up. "Best segment we've had in weeks." The red tally light blinked on. The final moments of the show tried to feel light, a little too light. Whoopi thanked Jasmine for coming, gave her a chance to plug her latest bill, and led the audience in polite applause. But the energy in the room had shifted. The viewers felt it. The hosts felt it. Jasmine felt it. This wasn't just a TV segment anymore. It was a receipt. Most guests would have smiled, nodded, and stuck to the script. But Jasmine leaned in, catching the moment right as Whoopi was wrapping up. "I came here in good faith," she said evenly, "but I'm not here to entertain disrespect." The room didn't erupt, it exhaled. Even Sunny, for the first time all morning, had nothing to say. The credits rolled. In the audience, people stood, not to leave, but to get closer to Jasmine as she made her way off set. A few shouted, "You handled that," and, "Thank you for saying what needed to be said." Security and production assistants stepped in, guiding her toward the hallway. Before she exited, Jasmine turned back to thank the audience herself. Backstage, Charmaine was waiting, her face a mix of pride and measured concern. "You just blew up the timeline," she murmured. Jasmine slipped on her blazer with a shrug. "Let it burn." But even Jasmine didn't yet realize how far the sparks would fly. Started almost immediately. A shaky phone clip from a college student in Cleveland hit social media. No captions, no filters, just Jasmine, eyes steady, voice clear. "I don't play the race card. I live the reality." The video hit 10,000 views in 6 minutes. By the time Jasmine reached the car, it was past 50,000, and rising. It wasn't just activists or politicos reposting it. It was grocery store clerks, public school teachers, young women in cities and small towns. One caption read, "We've all been told to be less so others can feel more. Not anymore." Another, "She said it calm, that's what makes it loud." Verified accounts followed. Journalists, artists, organizers, Even a retired white firefighter from Ohio commented, "I didn't know her name before today. I know it now." And she's right, hashtag swelled, hashtag let black women speak. Hashtag Team Crockett. Hashtag she said it. The View's official account hadn't posted the clip, and that became part of the story. Why hasn't it The View posted the best segment of the year? What are y'all scared of? Producers huddled upstairs, arguing over whether to release the uncut video. But by the time they agreed, the public already had unedited, unfiltered, and unapologetic the I in the SUV. Charmaine's phone lit up. A trusted journalist had texted, "You're the top story on 3 cable networks." That CNN was already airing a segment called The Crockett Moment. Charmaine scrolled, jaw tight. They're calling it a moment, like you didn't just lay down actual policy. Jasmine raised a brow. That's how they soften it. Turn impact into a soundbite. Want to issue a statement? Charmaine asked. Jasmine kicked off her heels. I said what I said. By the time they reached the hotel, she was trending in 15 cities. Morning shows scrambled to cover it. Network anchors opened segments with, "It's rare for daytime TV to spark a national conversation, but yesterday it happened." But by then, the conversation had already left the pundits behind. It was in living rooms, classrooms, break rooms, and barbershops. In a small salon in Shreveport, Louisiana, a group of women gathered before opening hours, playing the clip on a tablet. She didn't flinch, one said, twisting hair between her fingers. She didn't have to, another replied. I in Oakland, a high school black student union watched it. She said what my mom always says, one girl stood up and said. But no one listens to my mom when she says it. And across social feeds and comment sections, the message was the same: this is what it looks like to speak truth to power. Without apology. Not every response was praise. Some outlets tried to reframe it. A few op-eds called her remarks alienating. One claimed she had weaponized identity. Jasmine didn't respond. She didn't have to. The people who mattered, the ones without blue checks or media platforms, were already speaking louder. Charmaine showed her a Facebook post from a retired public defender in Tennessee. I've sat next to women like Jasmine in courtrooms. The pressure they carry is unseen labor. And when one finally says, no more, the whole system shakes. That's what yesterday was, and Jasmine knew the real test wasn't what people said today. It was whether it would still echo tomorrow. Some reactions were emotional, others celebratory. One video showed a woman sitting in her robe, hand pressed to her chest, lip-syncing every word of Jasmine's clip like a hymn. Another captured a teenager pausing the video to explain how teachers treated her differently for speaking up in class. Even pastors worked it into Sunday sermons, quoting Jasmine word for word, "Don't mistake volume for value." Meanwhile, longtime View fans, some who'd quietly stopped watching years ago, returned to echo a pattern too familiar to ignore. I tuned out when they kept interrupting women who looked like me. I love Whoopi, but not even she could stop what happened yesterday. They say they want bold voices until the voice isn't polite enough. Jasmine hadn't just struck a nerve, she'd unearthed a memory, one buried in boardrooms, classrooms, dinner tables. The countless times people, especially black women, had been asked to shrink, to soften, to dilute their truth. And this moment, while sparked by a TV appearance, wasn't about ratings or headlines. It was about what it revealed, the unwritten rules, the invisible lines, and the cost of being heard when you aren't the version people expected. In the middle of the storm, Jasmine stayed silent, not because she had nothing to say, but because she didn't need to add more. Her words were still traveling. One tweet captured it perfectly: Jasmine Crockett didn't go viral. She went visible. And now you can't pretend you didn't see it. But silence from the other side wouldn't hold. Sunny Hostin was trending too, and by Sunday afternoon, nearly 48 hours later, she spoke, carefully, deliberately, on Instagram. A controlled platform where she could type without crosstalk or Jasmine across from her. The post was short and polished. I believe in honest, difficult conversations. I have great respect for Congresswoman Crockett and the work she's doing. Our exchange was spirited, and while my questions were tough, they were never meant to offend. I recognize not everyone received it that way, and for that, I'm listening. It ended with the familiar corporate bomb, we grow through dialogue. Comments were turned off. Still, the reactions poured in elsewhere. Screenshots spread like wildfire across X and TikTok, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The tone, the phrasing, the sidestep. This isn't an apology. She's a listening to who? She policed Jasmine's tone for half an hour, then hides behind a caption. This is PR, not growth, some defended Sunny. Loyal followers called it brave to speak at all. That tough questions were her job. That Jasmine had been sharp too. But the wider consensus was clear, the post missed the moment. It tiptoed around the deeper issue, how certain guests are handled differently, and how a tough often comes with a side of condescension when the guest is a black woman who refuses to lower her voice to make the room more comfortable. Jasmine kept quiet until that evening, seated with Charmaine in a hotel lounge in Arlington as the sun dipped behind the buildings. Charmaine handed her the phone with Sunny's post. Jasmine scrolled it twice. No sigh. No eye roll. Just, she says she's listening. You gonna respond? Charmaine asked. Jasmine sipped her tea. I already did. On national television. Mic on. But the pressure to say more kept building. Journalists called. Morning shows sent invites. Even podcasters who'd never mentioned her name before were calling Jasmine a vital voice in the national conversation. By Monday morning, she answered, not with a thread, not with a PR-crafted statement, but with a simple video. No intro music. No logo. Just Jasmine on a park bench in Fort Worth, wind moving through her hair, no script in hand. I saw Sunny's post, she began. And I believe she meant what she said. But here's the thing, intent doesn't erase impact. When someone tells you they felt disrespected, the response can't just be, that wasn't my intention. It has to be, I hear you. I see how that landed. And I'll do better. That's what accountability looks like. That's how we move forward. Together. She didn't tag Sunny. Didn't ask for anything in return. She closed with a line that landed heavier than any viral soundbite. Speaking truth isn't the problem. Being asked to water it down so it's easier to swallow, that's the problem. Within 2 hours, it had 500,000 views. Comments poured in. That's how you lead. She's teaching folks how to address harm without erasing themselves. This is the blueprint. And for a brief moment, even social media's chaos seemed to pause. Because Jasmine had done something rare, she kept her dignity, acknowledged the complexity, and still refused to shrink. Later that day, Sunny reposted the video to her Instagram story. No caption. Not an endorsement, not resistance either. Maybe it was enough. Maybe not. But for the first time since the taping, both women had spoken their piece, and the audience would decide which version of the story they'd carry forward. And while the hashtags eventually faded, the conversations Jasmine sparked didn't. In classrooms, office meetings, salons, and churches, the echoes remained. In Jackson, Mississippi, a community roundtable that usually debated school zoning and grocery prices opened with one woman saying, I can't stop thinking about how she didn't apologize for being direct. How many times have I said sorry? For just saying what needed to be said? Her niece nodded. She didn't soften to be accepted. She just was. And it hit different. Across the country, the conversations weren't about sound bites anymore. They were about the cost of truth in spaces built for comfort, not clarity. In a journalism class in Madison, a professor paused a lecture, played the clip, then asked, what matters more, how something sounds or why it was said? A quiet student raised his hand. Both matter. But one gets people free. The other just gets them hired. In Fresno, a high school debate coach rewrote his curriculum, calling it the Crockett method, clear, poised argument rooted in lived experience. If your argument doesn't risk anything, he told his students, you're just talking. And back in Arlington, Jasmine returned to her district. No victory laps. No press blitz. She visited a halfway house, returned calls from two mothers whose sons were awaiting trial in county jail. To her, that moment on The View wasn't a career milestone. It was another space that needed to be reminded who gets heard and why it matters, but she knew something had shifted. Women she'd never met had written her stories they'd never told. Messages from survivors, veterans, students, black women, brown women, white women. Even a few men quietly admitting they'd spent years interrupting their wives, daughters, and colleagues without realizing what it felt like, and though some still whispered about tone, about polish, about presentation, those conversations were changing too. Because the point was never about winning the debate. It was about refusing to lose yourself in the process. That was the real moment. Not when Jasmine spoke. When she didn't shrink. Not when the clip went viral, but when it reached someone who needed permission to speak their own truth. Not when the cameras cut away, but when someone watching stood a little taller in their next meeting, answered without softening, or finally told someone, "You don't get to decide how I show up." Most people won't remember every episode of The View, every guest, every debate. But this one? This stuck. Because it wasn't about politics. It was about presence. About power. About the price you pay for clarity in rooms that prefer silence. Jasmine Crockett didn't just have a moment. She held up a mirror. Some turned away. Others looked and saw themselves, and if you take anything from it, let it be this: your voice is not too much. Your truth is not too loud. And sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is refuse to apologize for either.